My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 42, and the last time my family saw me, I was being escorted out of my childhood home in handcuffs, a moment my sister Emma has never let anyone forget. That was 15 years ago. Today, I'm standing in the back of St. Mary's Cathedral watching Emma's wedding rehearsal through the heavy oak doors, and she has no idea that the disgraced dropout she spent years mocking is now a senior special agent with the FBI's counterterrorism division. The irony isn't lost on me. Emma, who spent our entire childhood being the perfect daughter, valedictorian, homecoming queen, full scholarship to Northwestern, is marrying Captain James Mitchell, a Marine officer I've actually worked with on 3 joint operations. He has no idea his bride-to-be is my sister. Different last names will do that. I wasn't supposed to be here. The invitation never came, obviously, but James had mentioned his wedding to a Emma Fletcher during our last briefing, and when he showed me her photo, my blood turned to ice. 20 years of estrangement, and I was looking at my sister's face on a Marine captain's phone. "She's incredible," he'd said, beaming with that dopey grin engaged men get. "Comes from this amazing family. Her sister's kind of a black sheep, though. Got arrested as a teenager, never amounted to much. Emma doesn't talk about her." I just nodded and changed the subject. The arrest James was referring to happened when I was 17. I'd been out with friends when we stumbled onto what I thought was just a college party. Turns out, it was a drug distribution ring operating out of a fraternity house. When the DEA raided the place, I was one of 30 kids who got swept up. The charges were dropped within a week. I was a witness, not a participant, but the damage to my family's pristine reputation was done. My parents, both prominent attorneys in our small Illinois town, were mortified. Emma, then 15 and already showing signs of the perfectionism that would define her, was furious that I'd embarrassed the family name. The arrest made the local paper. Our neighbors whispered. Emma's friends at the country club asked questions. "You've ruined everything," she'd screamed at me the night I came home. "Do you know what people are saying about us? About me?" My parents shipped me off to military school the next week. "Until you can learn to make better choices," my father had said, not meeting my eyes. I was 18 when I graduated, and instead of coming home, I enlisted in the Army. By the time I finished my first tour, my parents had made it clear I wasn't welcome back. Emma went to Northwestern, then law school. She got married the first time to a surgeon, divorced him for reasons I never learned, and now she was marrying James. Through Christmas cards to my grandmother, the only family member who stayed in touch, I knew Emma had built a successful career as a corporate attorney. I knew she lived in a penthouse in Chicago. I knew she'd never stopped painting me as the family failure. What she didn't know was that after the Army, I'd been recruited by the FBI, that I'd spent 15 years climbing the ranks, that I'd testified before Senate subcommittees, been featured on the cover of law enforcement magazines, and received commendations from 3 different presidents. She had no idea that the dropout she'd written off was now one of the Bureau's most respected counterterrorism specialists. The military school she'd seen as punishment had actually been my salvation. The discipline, the structure, the way they taught us to think strategically, it had all clicked for me in a way traditional education never had. By graduation, I had college recruiters calling. I chose West Point Prep instead. 4 years of military service taught me about real leadership, real courage. When the FBI recruiter approached me, talking about serving my country in a different way, it felt like destiny. I was 26 when I graduated from Quantico, 28 when I made my first major case, breaking up a domestic terrorism cell that had been planning to bomb a federal courthouse. Emma knew none of this. To her, I was still the 17-year-old who'd brought shame to the Fletcher family name. Watching her now through the cathedral doors, radiant in her rehearsal dress, laughing with her bridesmaids, I felt that familiar mix of anger and sadness. Part of me had hoped that maybe, after all these years, she'd grown up, that maybe she'd realize how cruel she'd been to a teenager who was already struggling. But based on what James had told me, she was still dining out on my failures. "Rachel? Is that you?" I turned to see my grandmother, Dorothy Fletcher, walking up the cathedral steps with her careful, measured pace. At 86, she was still sharp as a tack, still the only person in my family who'd never stopped believing in me. "Grandma Dot," I hugged her carefully, mindful of her fragile frame. "I was hoping you'd come," she said, studying my face. "You look well. Professional. That's a nice suit." It was more than nice. It was a $2,000 Armani I'd bought for Senate testimony last month. But I just smiled. Thank you. How's Emma? Nervous, happy, still, she paused, choosing her words carefully, still very focused on appearances. That was diplomatic. And Mom and Dad? Older. Your father retired last year. Your mother still talks about you sometimes, when she thinks no one's listening. What does she say? That she wonders how you turned out, that maybe they were too harsh. Grandma Dot squeezed my arm. She won't admit she was wrong, but she knows. They both know. The rehearsal was wrapping up. Through the doors, I could see the wedding party gathering their things, preparing to head to the dinner. James was adjusting his dress blue uniform, the same uniform I'd seen him wear during operations briefings. Emma was beside him, glowing with that particular happiness of a woman who'd found her perfect life. Are you coming to the dinner? Grandma Dot asked. I shook my head. I don't think that's a good idea. What about tomorrow? The wedding? I'd been asking myself that question for 3 days, ever since I'd made the decision to fly out here. Part of me wanted to slip away, to let Emma have her perfect day without the complications my presence would bring. But another part of me, the part that had spent 15 years proving herself over and over again, wanted her to know, wanted them all to know. I don't know, I said honestly. The rehearsal dinner was at the country club where we'd grown up, the same place where Emma's friends had whispered about my arrest 25 years ago. I drove past it on my way back to the hotel, seeing the familiar brick facade, the manicured gardens, the valets in their crisp uniforms. It looked exactly the same. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Great rehearsal. Can't wait for you to meet Emma tomorrow. She's going to love you. I stared at the message for a long time before turning off the phone. The next morning, I stood in my hotel room, looking at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I'd brought 2 outfits, a conservative navy dress that would blend into the crowd, and my dress uniform, the FBI's formal attire, complete with my badge, my ribbons, and the insignia that marked me as a senior special agent. I chose the uniform. St. Mary's was packed. Emma had always been popular, and James's military connections meant half the guest list was in uniform. I slipped in just as the processional began, taking a seat in the very back row. From there, I could see everything. My parents in the front row, aged but still imposing, Emma's bridesmaids in their pale pink dresses, James's groomsmen standing at attention. Emma looked beautiful. There was no denying that. As she walked down the aisle on our father's arm, she radiated the kind of confidence that comes from a life lived exactly as planned. She'd gotten everything she'd ever wanted. The career, the status, the respect, and now the perfect military officer husband. The ceremony was traditional, elegant. When the priest announced them as husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause. James kissed his bride, and for a moment, I felt genuinely happy for them. Whatever my issues with Emma, James was a good man. He deserved happiness. It was at the reception that everything changed. The venue was the grand ballroom at the Palmer House, the kind of place that screamed old money and established success. Emma had spared no expense. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids, a 12-piece orchestra. I found a table in the back, nursing a glass of wine and watching the celebration unfold. The toasts began after dinner. James's best man spoke about brotherhood and service. Emma's maid of honor shared stories from college. My father gave a speech about family and tradition that made my chest tight with old hurt. Then Emma stood up. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, she began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. James and I are so grateful to be surrounded by the people who matter most to us, our families, our friends, the people who've supported us and believed in us throughout our lives. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. I've been incredibly fortunate to come from a family that taught me the importance of hard work, integrity, and making something of yourself. My parents, Robert and Patricia Fletcher, showed me what it means to build a respectable life, to contribute to your community, to be someone people can look up to. My stomach clenched. I knew where this was going. Of course, not everyone in a family follows the same path, Emma continued, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. Sometimes you have siblings who make different choices, choices that bring shame instead of honor, choices that disappoint rather than inspire. She looked directly at our parents as she spoke. But I think those experiences make you stronger. They teach you what you don't want to become. They show you the importance of surrounding yourself with people of character, people like James and all of you." Several guests murmured their agreement. James looked slightly uncomfortable, but he was smiling, probably thinking this was just typical wedding sentiment. He had no idea his wife was talking about her own sister. "So, thank you," Emma finished, raising her glass, "for being the kind of people who lift each other up instead of tear each other down, for being the kind of people I'm proud to call family." The applause was thunderous. People were dabbing at their eyes, moved by what they thought was a beautiful sentiment about choosing your family. They had no idea they'd just heard a public assassination of a woman they didn't even know was in the room. That's when I stood up. The movement caught James's attention first. From across the ballroom, I saw his eyes widen in recognition. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, realization, and then something close to panic. Emma was still basking in the applause when James leaned over and whispered something in her ear. She turned to look where he was pointing, and our eyes met for the first time in 15 years. The blood drained from her face. I began walking toward the head table, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet that was falling over the room. Guests were turning to look, sensing something was happening, but not understanding what. "Emma," I said when I reached the table. My voice carried clearly in the silence. "Congratulations on your wedding." She stared at me like she was seeing a ghost, which, in a way, she was. "Rachel, how did you—" "James invited me," I said simply. "Well, not exactly, but we work together sometimes." James had gone completely pale. "Emma, I had no idea she was your sister. She never mentioned—" "Work together?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my badge, setting it gently on the white tablecloth between us. The FBI seal caught the light from the chandeliers. "Senior Special Agent Rachel Morgan," I said, "FBI Counterterrorism Division. James and I collaborated on Operation Sandstone last year, and Operation Red Dawn the year before that." The silence in the ballroom was overwhelming. 300 people watched a moment they couldn't quite comprehend unfold at the head table. Emma's eyes flicked between my badge, my uniform, and my face. "But you got arrested. You dropped out. You were nothing." "I was 17, I said calmly. "I witnessed something terrible, but I wasn't the one responsible. The case was dismissed, but you never asked, did you?" Our father had started to rise from his chair. Our mother clutched her napkin so hard her knuckles turned white. "I went to military school," I went on, "then served in the Army, then joined the FBI Academy. For the past 15 years, I've dedicated my life to protecting this country. I've saved lives. I've prevented disasters. I've even spoken before Congress." James looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "The Morgan who stopped the Riverside Mall incident? That was you?" I nodded. That case had been all over the news. A dangerous plot set to unfold at a shopping center during the holiday rush. We shut it down just in time. "Oh my God," James breathed. "Emma, do you know who your sister is? She's legendary in counterterrorism circles. She's been on the cover of—" "Stop," Emma whispered. She was shaking now, her perfect composure cracking like ice. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "It's real," I said gently. "I'm real. I've always been real, Emma. You just never bothered to look." The entire ballroom was watching now. Guests were pulling out phones, whispering to each other, trying to piece together what was happening. At the parents' table, my mother had tears streaming down her face. "You said," Emma's voice broke, "in your speech, you said people who bring shame instead of honor, people who disappoint instead of inspire." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Which one of us has been doing that, Emma?" She couldn't answer. She just sat there, staring at my badge like it might disappear if she looked at it long enough. James stood up slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a Marine officer, "I'd like you to meet my new sister-in-law, Senior Special Agent Rachel Morgan of the FBI, one of the finest law enforcement officers I've ever had the privilege to work with." He started clapping. Slowly, uncertainly, other guests joined in. The applause built until it filled the ballroom, 300 people honoring a woman they'd never heard of 5 minutes ago. Emma buried her face in her hands. I picked up my badge and slipped it back into my jacket. I should go, I said quietly. I'm sorry to interrupt your reception. No, James said firmly. Don't go, please, your family. I looked at Emma, still hiding behind her hands, then at my parents across the room. My father was standing now, taking a tentative step toward our table. My mother was crying openly. I think I've said what I came to say, I replied. As I turned to leave, Emma finally looked up. Her makeup was ruined, her eyes red with tears. Rachel, wait. I stopped. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought... You thought what you wanted to think, I said. You needed me to be the failure so you could be the success. But Emma, I was never your competition. I was just your sister. I walked out of that ballroom with my head high, leaving behind a room full of people who finally knew the truth. The valet brought my car around, and as I drove away from the Palmer house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 25 years. Peace. My phone buzzed with messages for the next 3 hours. James, apologizing and asking me to reconsider staying. My grandmother, proud and protective as always. My mother, tentatively reaching out after 15 years of silence. And Emma, just one message, sent at midnight. Can we talk? I turned off the phone and flew back to DC the next morning. There would be time for talking later, if that's what she really wanted. Time for healing, maybe even reconciliation. But first, Emma needed to sit with what had happened. She needed to understand that the sister she'd written off as worthless had actually been serving her country with honor while she'd been climbing corporate ladders and planning perfect weddings. 3 weeks later, I got a package at my office. Inside was a wedding photo. Not one of the professional shots, but a candid image someone had taken during the reception. It showed the moment right after James had introduced me to the room, when the applause was building and Emma was staring at my badge with that look of absolute shock. On the back, Emma had written, I was wrong about everything. I'm proud to be your sister, Emma. It's been 6 months since the wedding. Emma and I have had coffee twice, awkward conversations where we're both trying to figure out how to be sisters again after 25 years. James has become an unexpected ally, someone who understands both worlds, the military precision of service and the messy complications of family. My parents are trying, in their own careful way. They'll never admit they were wrong to send me away, but they've stopped pretending I don't exist. It's something. The real revelation, though, wasn't what my family learned about me that night, it was what I learned about myself. For 25 years, I'd carried their rejection like a weight, always trying to prove I was worthy of love and respect. But standing in that ballroom, watching Emma's perfect world crack open to reveal the truth, I realized I'd already proven everything I needed to prove. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had saved lives, served my country, and built a career I could be proud of. I had earned my place in the world not through family connections or inherited status, but through my own merit and determination. The 17-year-old girl who'd been escorted out of her childhood home in handcuffs had grown up to become exactly who she was meant to be, and that was revenge enough.